okay? I think it's impressive that you can tell someone not to do something, and less than 15 seconds later, they do the thing that you just told them not to do. And I know I probably shouldn't speak for all the parents in the room, because that's usually not a good idea when you generalize. But just so all the kids in the room know, for most of us parents, the most frustrating part about your kids doing something that you just told them not to do is actually not the part where your kids do the thing that you just told them not to do. To me, in my opinion, the most frustrating thing about your kid doing the thing that you just told them not to do is the part where you ask your kid why they just did the thing that you told them not to do, and they stare at you with a dumb look on their face and go, I don't know. Anybody with me on this one? I'm like, what? What do you mean you don't know? That makes no sense. I literally just told you, do not open the bag of Cheetos. And 10 seconds later, you're inhaling the entire bag like your life depended on it. And you expect me to believe that you have no idea why that happened. And I know a lot of parents in this room are probably smarter than I am, and you guys have probably figured this out. But I learned quickly that in those moments when your kids do things that you just told them not to do, it actually tells you a whole lot more about you than about them. Anybody know what I'm talking about? Like case in point, I said, do not open the bag of Cheetos. She opens it, and I learned fairly quickly that my capacity to be patient and kind and merciful when my kids deliberately disobey me is not quite as high as I would like it to be. I don't know why you're laughing at me, but I'm just trying to be vulnerable here. You should be praying for me, okay? And I know this is probably not something that, that we want to promote, because, a lot of us, especially if you've been around the church in a while, we have a reputation to protect. But I think if we're honest, I think if we kept it real, I think the truth is that for many of us who talk a good game and sing a big song about God's goodness and his greatness and his mercy and his compassion, I think the truth is that in our heart of hearts, we actually don't really believe that God's capacity to be patient and kind and merciful to children who repeatedly disobey him is quite as high as we've been led to believe. And before you say, no, that's not true for me, Pastor, you may want to wait till you hear today's story, because it's going to push the limits of what you believe about God's patience. 2 Samuel is where we're going to spend our time today. If you have a Bible with you, I would love for you to follow along. I want to give you guys a little bit of a background on the protagonist of our story today, okay? And for those of you who may not be familiar with who David is, outside of that one viral moment when he threw a rock and took a giant down. Anybody ever heard that story, right? Everybody in the room, even if it's your first time in church, you've probably heard the story of David defeating Goliath. And if you don't know too much about David, you may be surprised to find out that this little shepherd boy who defeated the giant actually went on from a giant slayer to a fierce warrior, a respected military strategist, a renowned poet, a musical prodigy, a lover of God, and he was one of the greatest kings in the ancient world. So in other words, David wasn't just Rocky in Rocky 4. No, David was Rocky, and he was Maximus from Gladiator, and he was John Wick, and he was James Bond, and Sherlock Holmes, and Bob Dylan, and Kendrick Lamar, and Billy Graham all in one. Okay, that is who, and you guys think I'm hyping this, but I'm telling you right now, ask anybody who knows anything about the story arc of the Bible, and they will tell you that you can make a legitimate argument that outside of Jesus, there is no other character in the Bible that played a more important role than David. And that is why I am confused and, dare I say, a little shook that they left the part of David's story that we're going to read about in the Bible. I'm shocked that God decided that he was going to leave David's really big scandal in the Bible, even though he knew that a lot of skeptics were going to read it and break it down for generations to come. Check it out. 2 Samuel chapter 11 is where we're going to set up stage. If you don't have a Bible, voila, it's on the screen. You can follow along. Here's what the writer says. The writer says, it's a difficult text, but we're going to try our best to work our way through it, that it was in the spring, somebody say in the spring, at the time when kings go to war, that David sent Joab, underline Joab if you have a Bible, and I'll tell you why in a little bit, out with the king's men and the whole Israelite army. Any Star Wars fans in here? You guys know how the old Star Wars movies? Okay, 5 people love Star Wars. Anybody, let's try something else. Anybody ever seen a movie before in your life? Like, you know what a movie is? Okay, all right. Some of you are like, no, I don't. You should check it out sometime. It's amazing. Just go to the mall and you pay and you get to watch in the big train. It's really, really cool. You get popcorn and all that stuff. It costs $1 million, but it's a great experience, okay? But anybody ever seen a movie? Star Wars did this a lot. You know, where the movie starts and there's an opening crawl. You know what I'm talking about? You know what I'm talking about? Like there's words on the screen, and usually those words will give you a timestamp and some kind of context, right? And the reason there's an opening scroll is because the writers want to give you a backdrop for the opening scene. And so they're like, before you start watching the movie, here's when it happened, and here's what's about to happen. In a galaxy far, far away, a long time ago. That's what the writer is doing here. The writer, before he tells you the story, is trying to give you a backdrop for the story. And he wants you to know that, hey, the story you're about to read happens in the spring. And not only does it happen in the spring, but it happens at a time when kings go to war. Now, David is a king in this passage, and David's not going to war. Instead of going to war like kings would do in this context, David sends a guy named Joab out with the men to go fight his battle. Are you guys tracking? Thank you. Side of the room, not so much. All right, I'll do my best to catch you up. So the army went out, they destroyed the Ammonites, and they besieged Rabbah. But David stayed in Jerusalem. Verse 2 says, one evening, David got up from his bed, and he walked around on the roof of his palace. And from the roof, he saw a woman bathing. And the writer says the woman was very beautiful. This is probably not helpful this far into the conversation, because usually you give people a heads up ahead of time. But heads up, this movie is rated R. Okay, and this movie is rated R not just because David goes up on the roof of his palace and sees a woman, a beautiful woman bathing. No, this story is rated R because of what happens next. Listen to what the writer says. The writer says, so David, after seeing her, sent someone to go find out about her. And then the man came back and he says, yo, she's got a name. Her name is Bathsheba. And not only does she got a name, she is a daughter. And not only is she a daughter of somebody, but she is the, what's the word? Wife of somebody, of Uriah the Hittite. So messenger comes back, yo, I found out. I got the info. Got a name, daughter of somebody, and a wife. And watch how David responds. It says, then David sent messengers to get her. She came to him. He slept with her. She was purifying herself from a monthly uncleanness. Then she went back home. Not going to spend too much time in here because we got minors in the room, and I kind of want to be sensitive to the season of life they're in. But I do want to say this. I've been doing this long enough to know in the room this size, and maybe somebody watching online, that chances are, for some of you, this hits a little too close to home. Okay, and if that's you, I just want you to know something. I want you to know that we've been praying for you this week. I want you to know that I literally sent a text out to a group of people like, hey, we're going to go through a very difficult text, and this is not even the focus of the conversation, but I just know that we're going to read these verses, and it's probably going to stir up some things in some people. And so I just want you to know that we're praying for you. We prayed for this moment. We prayed that God would protect you. We pray that you would feel the presence of God. I also want you to know that I know that what I'm about to say next does not absolve or solve or resolve what happened to you, but just in case nobody has ever said this to you, listen carefully. What happened was not your fault. I don't know who needs to hear this, but what happened was not your fault any more than what happened to Bathsheba was her fault. I'm not going to spend too much time here, but I do think it's important to be clear, at least for those of us who are old enough to read between the lines, that this isn't a story of two consenting adults, who met, maybe online, and they kind of both swiped, and then they hung out, and then they drank a little too much, and both agreed to do something they shouldn't have done. No, that's not this story. This is a story of two people. One guy had all the power and all the authority, and the other person had no power and no authority. And the person who had all the power and all the authority just leveraged all of his power and all of his authority to take advantage of the vulnerable person who had no power and no authority. David just used the platform that God gave him to assault a vulnerable woman. And if you think that is bad, well, you may want to brace for impact, because the story gets even crazier than that. After she went back home, verse 5 says, the woman then conceived, and then she sent word to David. She sent him probably a text that David didn't want to get. She's like, yo, I'm pregnant. And watch what David does. It says in verse 6, so David sent word to Joab. Do you guys remember who Joab is? Who's Joab? Anybody remember? Remember? You can say it. Some of you go like, no, I can't hear anything. What's Joab? Joab's the guy from verse 1, right? Joab's the guy that David sends to go fight in his place, right? And so it says that David sent word to Joab. And he told Joab to send him Uriah the Hittite. You guys remember who Uriah was? Who's Uriah? The husband. Okay, so David sent word to Joab, and he told Joab to send him Uriah. Right? So he sent word to his military guy to get the husband who was in battle with the military guy. And it says that Joab sent him to David. And when Uriah came to him, this is so funny to me, David asked him how Joab was. That makes no sense. That makes no sense, Tom. That would be like if I say, hey, Tom, do me a favor. Can you go in the lobby and go get Jeremy? I need to talk to Jeremy. Like, got it. You go out and you get Jeremy. And Jeremy comes back. And I was like, hey, Jeremy, how's Tom doing? Talked to Tom lately? And you're like, wait, you guys see? Like, he said, hey, Joab, go get me Uriah. Uriah comes. He's like, yo, so how's Joab doing? Right? You ever been in a conversation with someone and you feel like they're just like making small talk, like they're asking you stuff, and you're like, why are we talking about this? Like, but they're just trying to cover up for what they really want to say. You ever been in that conversation? Like, hey, so how's your mom doing? I was like, my mom? What are you like? So he's asking this question, and David's just trying to use small talk to fill the space before he says what he really wants to say. And so David said to him, asked about Joab and how the soldiers were, how the war was going. You would think he would ask Joab how that was going, but he's trying to fill the gap. And then David said this to Uriah. He says, hey, I want you to go down to your house, and I want you to wash your feet. And so Uriah left the palace, and there was a gift from the king that was sent to him. And Uriah's like, wow, man, I won the lottery. This king's so nice to me. He didn't even know my name before, but all of a sudden, he's inviting me over. We're talking. He's sending me gifts through Amazon Prime. This is amazing. It says, but Uriah slept at the entrance to the palace with all of his master's servants. He didn't go down to the house. And so David was told, hey, yo, man, your plan didn't work. Uriah didn't go home. And so David called Uriah up on his cell. He's like, hey, what's up, man? Haven't you just, he's like, didn't you just come back from a military campaign? You've been fighting, man. Aren't you tired and exhausted? Why didn't you go home? And Uriah said to him, he said, hey, the ark and Israel and Judah, they're all staying in tents. My commander Joab and my Lord's army, they're camped in the open country. How could I go to my house to eat and drink and make love to my wife? As surely as you live, I will do no such thing. Then David said to him in verse 12, stay here one more day, and tomorrow I'm going to send you back. And so Uriah remained in Jerusalem that day and the next. Verse 13 says, at David's invitation, Uriah ate and drank with him And David, man, I mean, you guys you've seen this scene before, like in the movies, like, hey, you get somebody over, you give them good food, and you're like, hey, toast, like, hey, another toast, David's like, another toast, and he's not really drinking the thing, but he's just trying to get Uriah to drink as much, because he's trying to get Uriah drunk, and Uriah doesn't know what's going on. He's just like, this is cool, man. I get to kick it with the king, and we get the best wine. This is amazing. And so Uriah drinks, and Uriah is drunk, and now he's like, man, I got to call an Uber to take me home. Like this, I can't even drive home. This is kind of crazy, but this is what David wanted to happen. But in the evening, Uriah went out to sleep on his mat among his master's servants, but he did not go home. Here's what's happening. David's trying to manipulate the circumstances in his favor. Okay, and I don't know if anybody, you guys ever watch those shows? I feel like it's always the same. You ever seen those shows where, there's a woman and she's sitting on this side of the stage, and then there's two confused dudes sitting across from her. Anybody know where this is going? And then in the middle is a host, and he's got a manila envelope. Anybody see? Show of hands if you watch this, okay? Oh, look at all these people watching this filth. Should pray for you guys. I'm kidding. Right? Those stories that, you know what I'm talking about? And then he opens the envelope. The test results that you are, dramatic pause, not the father. And I love this. I love it. Because she gets up and she walks backstage and the cameras are chasing her. And the dude's like, I told you, man. I told you. I don't know why I love it. I'm like, this is so dramatic. It's fake, but it's so dramatic. It's like, I told you I wasn't the father. Okay, and I didn't do this research. I probably should have. Maybe Jeremy or Amy or someone smarter can tell me. But I'm pretty sure that when this story happened, they didn't have DNA back then. There wasn't any manila envelopes with DNA to prove who the baby daddy was. And David knew that. What David is doing here is he's trying to kind of play chess. He's trying to give himself plausible deniability. He's trying to get Uriah to go home and sleep with his wife, because if Uriah does that, then Uriah doesn't have a way to confirm. Uriah's probably going to be like, oh, okay, I guess you're pregnant. I guess it's my baby, right? I guess there's no DNA test. He's trying to arrange the, you guys catch where this is going? He's like, come on, go home, have fun. So that when it's time for the baby, he goes, well, right, nobody questions anything. And if, I don't know, if Bathsheba decides she's going to out the king, he can be like, no, man, you remember Uriah came home and, and there's no DNA. He's trying to move the pieces. But unfortunately, Uriah is not, for whatever reason, he never goes home. And I don't know if you guys have noticed, but when we are trapped in a sin, not only does the sin seem to snowball, but we get desperate. Remember what I'm talking about? Like you ever, it's interesting how it starts so small, and then it snowballs, and then it snowballs, and then all of a sudden you find yourself making decisions that you never thought you would make. And so David's scrambling right now to cover his tracks. And when his plan doesn't work, he does the unthinkable. Watch this. It says, in the morning, this is so cold. David wrote a letter to Joab and sent it with Uriah. This is insane. Some of you are like, why did my parents name me David? This guy's not a good guy. Right? He wrote a letter, gave it to Uriah, the husband, and says, hey, go give it to Joab. And Uriah's probably like, thanks, man. I got you. We're boys. I mean, we ate, we drank. I got you. And Uriah doesn't know he's carrying his own death sentence. Takes the letter, gives it to Joab. Here's what was in the letter. This is what David told. He says, put Uriah in the front where the fighting is fiercest. Then withdraw from him so that he would be struck down and die. And so while Joab had the city under siege, he did. Joab was a loyal guy. He did what his king told him to do. He put Uriah at the place where he knew the strongest defenders were. When the city came out and fought against Joab, some of the men in David's army fell. Moreover, Uriah the Hittite died. Verse 13 says, Joab then sent a full account of the battle to the king. He told the messenger, hey, when you finish giving the king this account of the battle, the king may get angry. His anger may flare up. And he may say to you, why did you get so close to the city? Didn't you know that they would shoot arrows from the wall? Who killed Abimelech, son of Jerubasheth, right? Didn't a woman drop an upper millstone on him from the wall so that he died in Tebez? They're reaching back now to some historical battle that has happened that should have informed their strategy. And maybe Joab had done some things that he wasn't supposed to do, and he figured out the king wouldn't be happy because the war wasn't going as well as should have gone. And look at all the manipulation in everyone's trying to game each other. And so he's like, the king may not be happy when he finds out how we've been fighting this battle, but if he asks you these questions, say to him, moreover, your servant Uriah the Hittite is dead. He's like, he may get mad at what we're doing, but if he does, just tell him that I did the thing that he wanted me to do. And so the messenger went out, and when he arrived, he told David everything Joab had sent him to say. The messenger said to David, the men overpowered us. They came against us in the open. We drove them back to the entrance of the gate. The archers shot arrows at your servants from the wall. Some of the king's men died. Moreover, he says, your servant Uriah the Hittite is dead. And watch David's response. David told the messenger, say this to Joab, don't let this upset you. The sword devours one as well as another. Press attack against the city. Destroy it. Say this to encourage Joab. Verse 26. When Uriah's wife, you guys remember her name? What's her name? Bathsheba, right? Heard that her husband was dead, she mourned for him. And after the time of mourning was over, David had her brought to his house, and she became his wife and bore him a son. And this next part might be the most no-da verse in the entire Bible. But the thing that David had done displeased the Lord. I know that was a lot of text, so let me give you the TLDR for those of you who are like, checked out after the first two verses. David was a king, one of the most important kings in the ancient times. David didn't go to war like he was supposed to. He stayed at home. David sees a woman bathing, an innocent woman, a vulnerable woman. David used his power and his authority after finding out who she was. That not only does she have a name, but she's a daughter and she's a wife. And David goes, don't care. Bring her to me. They bring her to David. He assaults her. She gets pregnant. He tries to cover it up. And when that didn't work, he put out a hit on her husband. And after he was murdered, he had her brought to his house to be his wife. Not tell her I kind of like her, does she want to go to Applebee's? Let's hang out for a little bit, get to know each other. No. David says, hey, go get her. Bathsheba had no choice. Is anybody wondering what I was wondering when I started reading this scripture? Why is this in the Bible? I'm serious. The more I read the story, I was like, I don't believe they left this stuff. I don't believe that there was nobody in the editing room that was like, hey, this is one of the greatest heroes of the faith. Maybe we should take this part out. Because this is a bad look. And so when I started writing the sermon, I just get to, why did they, I don't believe they left. Why did they leave this story in the Bible? It's a bad look. But by the end of my sermon prep, my thoughts changed from, I don't believe they left it in there to, oh boy, I'm so glad they left it in there. I'm so glad they left this story in there, even though it was such a scandal. Because now, we not only get to see what David did, but we get to see how God responded to David, amen? We not only get to see what it looks like when you deliberately disobey God over and over and over and over and over again, but we get to see how God responds when his children deliberately disobey him over and over and over and over and over again, even though they know better. And that's the thing about the story, is that it wasn't just one mistake. It wasn't like David was like, okay, I probably shouldn't have looked. I was on the palace and I looked a little too long. No. It just kept going and it kept going and he didn't care. And now, God says, Watch how I respond. Can we keep reading the text? Okay, thank you. 2 people. All right, that's all I need. That's all I need. I just need 1, but I got 2. So the Lord sent Nathan to David. And this is a quick side note. I shared this with our young adults at our last young adult thing. We do a young adult thing every month, by the way. Anybody? Where are my young adults at? There they are. Okay, somewhere in there. Not as loud as I expected, but A for effort on that one. But once a month, we have a Bible study at Bunker Bar. It's amazing. Like, it's one of my favorite things. Because on Sunday, I have someone, they're going to come up in a little bit, and they're going to play keys behind me because it makes me sound so spiritual. But when we're at Bunker Bar, it's a bunch of people in the bar drinking and doing God knows whatever. That's the background to me teaching the Bible. It is the coolest thing ever. And so it's this Tuesday. If you're a young adult, make sure you come. But last month, we were hanging out. And I don't know if you remember, Mo, but I talked about how anytime we're struggling, anytime we're stuck, anytime we find ourselves in a place where we're like, I don't really know how to get, I don't really know where, God always sends somebody. Amen? Like, listen, God, I don't know where you are, but God will almost always send somebody to come help you when you are stuck. Now, you may not like who he sends, and you may not like the message. Anybody ever, God sent somebody and you're happy at first, and then they tell you the message and you're like, yeah, I preferred not sending the help, but he's always going to send somebody. And so in this particular situation, David's spiraling in his sin. And so God's like, yo, I'm going to send Nathan. Who's Nathan? Nathan wasn't just a prophet. Nathan was a trusted advisor in David's close inner circle. Nathan is the guy who called David, and David would pick up the phone like, yo, you know how there's some people that call you and you're like, go to voicemail, and then other people are like, what's up, dude? Like, that was Nathan. And so Nathan rolled up, and David's like, my man, daps him up, so cool. And Nathan's like, yo, I got a story for you. And David's like, I love stories, man. You're hilarious. This is great. This is great. Everybody leave me. Nobody disturb me. My man's got a story. It's going to be great. And so Nathan tells him the story. He said, hey, guess what? He says, there were 2 men in a certain town. One of them was rich, and the other was poor. The rich man had a large amount of sheep and cattle. But the poor man, he had nothing except one little ewe lamb that he had bought. Just a tiny little lamb. Nobody cared, Nobody even liked it when he posted it on Instagram. They're like, that's stupid. It's just one. Nobody cares. But it didn't matter to this man. He loved that little lamb. He raised it. He grew up with it and his children. He shared its food, drank from his cup. Kind of gross, but not my thing, But he even slept in his arms. It was like a daughter to him. And David's like, wow, that sounds lovely. And then he says this, now a traveler came to the rich man, but the rich man refrained from taking one of his own sheep or cattle to prepare a meal for the traveler who had come to him. Instead, he took the lamb that belonged to the poor man, and he prepared it for the one who, oh, Nathan, you sneaky, sneaky prophet. You guys see what he's doing? My man is setting a trap. It's like Kevin from Home Alone. It's like, all right, the wet bandits are going to come through this door right now. I'm going to set the thing, the can of paint, the thing is going to happen. He's setting a trap. This is so genius. Nathan doesn't go up to David and go, yo, man, your gig's up. God told me what you did. No. He goes in, tells the story, sets a perfect trap, and sure enough, David falls right into it. Listen to what the writer says. After hearing the story, it says, David burned with what? Anger. And he said to Nathan, as surely as the Lord lives, the man who did this must die. He must pay for that lamb 4 times over because he did such a thing and had no pity. Somebody say, got him. Right? Got him. David's mad. He's like, man, you just tell me the name. He's like, hold me back, man. Tell me the name. Who would do such a thing? And Nathan, this is like that scene from the movie, I want the truth. You can't handle it. Yeah. David's like, just say the name. Say the name. Nathan goes, he's mad. Just tell me who. And he goes, you're the man. Awkward silence. It's you. You are the man. And this is what God says. I anointed you as king. I delivered you from the hand of Saul. I gave your master's house to you and your master's wives into your arms. Do not ask me what that means. I do not know, but Jeremy is in the back and he has volunteered to answer any questions that you might have. I gave you all of Israel and all of Judah. And if this would have been too little, I would have given you more. Why did you despise the word of God by doing what is evil in his eyes? You struck down Uriah the Hittite with a sword and took his wife to be your own, and you had him killed. So God sends Nathan to go out David. And watch how when Nathan shows up, he doesn't show up guns blazing. First, kind of sets a trap. And then he says, it's you. And the reason that Nathan does it the way he does it, I think at least in part, is because Nathan knows something that a lot of us who have been in church a long time seem to forget. Nathan knows that unchecked sin has a way of creating self-righteous indignation about other people's sin. Nathan knew that one of the biggest tells of I got stuff in my life that I'm hiding is that I'm gonna get mad about what other people are doing. Anybody you ever notice this? Okay, and I'm just throwing it out there. But isn't it interesting that sometimes the people who are the loudest about other people's sin usually are hiding the most? That makes me nervous. I get nervous. I love how nobody's like breathing right now, like, ugh. Seriously, I get nervous when people talk so much about other people's sin and they seem to talk very little about their own. I get nervous when I go on the Facebooks and I'm scrolling through a feed and every single post is about what somebody is doing and what somebody shouldn't be doing. And I'm looking closely like, I don't see anything about what you shouldn't be doing. Right? I get nervous, and maybe I can just speak for myself. When pastors like me get up on a stage like this, and over and over and over again, all they want to talk about is the hypocrisy of all the political leaders who are adding to the decay of our society, and they never talk about the hypocrisy of spiritual leaders like us who are also adding to the decay of society. I get a little bit nervous when we get up on stage and we tell stories that only seem to make us look good. And maybe you guys don't care about this, but for what it's worth, I had to check myself over and over and over again this whole week before I could get up here and preach this sermon. Because I know that if you let it, sin has a way of fooling you into thinking you are justified in being outraged at the sins of other people. David lied, committed adultery, plot to murder, and he is mad at what someone did with sheep. And I'm telling you, sin that's unchecked in your heart will do that to you. Unchecked sin will fool you into thinking you're justified in being outraged at what that person did. Right? Sin will have you rolling your eyes at someone else just because they sin different than you. Can I give some examples that make us real uncomfortable? We're already uncomfortable, right? Come on now. Sin will fool you into you thinking you're justified when you come into a room like this and you judge someone for not raising their hand in worship, even though you just cursed your wife out in the car before you came in with a smile on your face. You saw Joe at the door. This is the day that the Lord has made. I will be glad and rejoice in it. And you're squeezing your wife's hand like. Sin will make you judge what someone is wearing, even though you just undressed everybody in your imagination. Sin will fool you into into judging someone who maybe, I don't know, maybe you can smell a little alcohol on them on Sunday morning, and you're judging them, even though you just cheated on your taxes, right? Sin will get you outraged at what this man did to that other man's sheep, even though you just committed adultery and murder. Nathan knew that. Nathan is not new to this. And so he showed up and he set a trap. And David fell into it. And he goes, hey, it's you. It's you. And I know there's some of you in the room and you're still checking out church and God and faith. And you're like, whoa, this is a lot. And I don't know if this helps you or not, but I'm mostly talking to those of us who have been around this thing a minute. And if I could just push the seasoned, quote unquote, Christians in the room for a minute, I'm really worried for you. If you cannot remember the last time you had a it's you moment. Right? Like you don't have to give a show of hand, but when was the last time you were like, I mean, I want to, but it's me. I'm the one. Nathan said it's you. And say what you will about David and how selfish it was, which he was, and how despicable his actions were, which they were. You got to give the man his flowers. Because when Nathan said, you're the man, you know what David didn't say? David didn't say, remember that one time when I killed the Goliath and saved everybody? Can we talk about that? Or David didn't go, how dare you come into my palace and accuse me of this? What about the benefit of the doubt, Nathan? You've known me for a long time. She is lying on me, bro. She's not. He didn't. No. Nathan said, you're the man. And listen to what David says, right? Nathan tells him a whole bunch of consequences, right? He says, the sword won't depart from your house because you've despised me and took Uriah, wife of Uriah the Hittite, to be your own. This is what God says. Out of your own household, I'm going to bring calamity on you. This is a heavy text. Because before your eyes, I'm going to take your wives and give them to the ones who are close to you. He's going to sleep with your wives in broad daylight. Again, another question for Jeremy. You did it in secret, but I will do this thing in the broad daylight. And I kind of kid a little bit, but this is kind of a side conversation. But part of what God is saying here is like, hey, there are consequences to your action, David, that you are going to experience the consequences of your actions. And we've talked about this, right? This is why the whole thing in our culture today about, just do what feels good to you and follow you. This is the problem. The problem is I can't just do what I want to do because it's my life, because what I do affects the people in my life. Anybody lived long enough to know that the consequences of your actions don't just affect you, but they affect, that there's a ripple effect, that your children and your loved ones have shrapnel in their soul because of decisions that you made? Some of you are in the room right now, and the reason you can barely come to church is because some youth pastor or some leader 20 years ago made one decision and you still got that shrapnel in your soul. Don't ever let anyone fool you into thinking the consequences of your decision are just about you. No. It's going to affect a whole lot of people. The blast range is always wider than you could imagine. Sin always costs more than advertised. You better read the fine print. And so Nathan's going, this is going to cost a whole lot of people. And David responds to Nathan. And he says, hey, I have sinned against the Lord. That was his response when Nathan said, you're the man. Not, let me set the record. I've sinned. Here's how we put it in Psalm chapter 51. Right? If you don't know what a psalm is, there's 150 psalms, I believe. And psalms are basically sacred songs and poems that are used for worship. And David wrote most of the psalms in the Bible. And in this particular psalm, verse 51, right? If you look in your Bible, does anybody have this little description at the top of their Bible, in their Bible? Right? Anybody got it in there? Most of the Bibles should have it. And it says, this is a psalm of David when the prophet Nathan came to him after David had committed adultery with Bathsheba. And so the text wants us to know that what you're about to read is what David wrote after he was confronted. Not sure how you would have responded if you were David and someone confronted you and said, you're the man, and they pointed out your hypocrisy. But listen to how David responded. It says here in verse 1 of Psalm 51, have mercy on me, O God, according to your unfailing love. According, he says, to your great compassion, blot out my transgressions. Wash away my iniquity. Cleanse me from my sin. There's no gray area. David's like, I need you. He says, I know my transgressions, and my sin is always before me. Man, I wish we had time to read the entire chapter. Please read Psalm 51 when you get home. It is unbelievable how David responds to being called out for his actions. But for the sake of our conversation, I want to just focus on verse 1. David says, have mercy on me, O God. Keyword there is mercy. You ever been in a place where you owed somebody something and you couldn't pay him back even if you tried? I have. Freshman year, I lived in an apartment in the Old West End, and just a lot of crazy stuff was happening in my life and my family's life. Couldn't afford rent. I was like 3 months back in rent. And my landlord kept asking, and I would stay in the student union, it's a true story, till 2 in the morning in the computer lab until they kicked me out because I didn't want to go back home. And I would take the last bus home, and I would tiptoe in my bedroom because I didn't want him to hear me. And then I would get up at 4 or 5, and I would tiptoe out because I didn't want him to hear me because I owed him. And I'll never forget one day, I was tiptoeing in at 2 in the morning. I opened my bedroom door, and he's standing there. I know. And I couldn't, I didn't know what was worse. The fact that he just caught me, or the fact that I couldn't ever pay him back. It wasn't hey, give me 2 days. Okay, my parents, in Nigeria, Western Union, it takes a while. You got to put it on the boat, and then on the plane, then on the train, and someone's got to ride a bicycle to get it to, it wasn't that. I knew that it wasn't coming. And so, I had nothing. Okay, the reason David starts with the mercy of God in this passage instead of promises to do better is because David knows that no amount of good is going to ever cancel out what he just did. The reason David is appealing to the mercy of God is because David knows that he owes a debt he can't ever pay back. He knows that if he spent the rest of his life being a good person, it would not be enough to pay the debt he owed for what he just did. The reason David starts out the psalm the way he did, don't miss this, is because David knew that he had one play. Mercy. Mercy. When you owe a debt you can't pay, no matter how hard you try, when you've been caught in your worst moment and you can't hide, you got one play. Mercy. 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 He's like, have mercy on me. Not according to what I've done or whatever I know, none of that. According to your compassion and your unfailing love, mercy. Mercy. I know for some of you, this may be a hard place to get to. But this is your only move. This is all you have. And this is all I have in front of a holy God. It is what? Have mercy on me, O God, according to your unfailing love. David's going, mercy. And when he do it, David asked for mercy. You ready for this? And he got it. He got it. Go back with me again to the text and watch what happens. It says, where is it? It says, listen. It says, David said to Nathan, I have sinned against the Lord. And Nathan replied, the Lord has taken away your sin. Another translation says, the Lord has forgiven you. Real talk? Can I be real for a little bit? Okay, thank you. We'll just have a conversation. Everyone else is like, how real? I don't know. The first thought that came into my mind when I read this was like, that seems a little too easy. Can I say that out loud? I'm like, I just read about how this guy lied and cheated and adultery and murder. And he's like, mercy. And God's like, forgiven. I'm like, that seems a little too easy. Right? I mean, it would be one thing if it says, mercy. And then 20 years later, after he's worked his way back and redeemed himself, God's like, okay, I forgive you. But that's not it. One verse. Mercy, I've sinned. Forgiven. I'm like, this is, like, that was the first thought I had in my mind was, this is too easy. And then I had a second thought. Well, not only was it too easy for God to forgive David, but I think it was a little too easy for him to forgive me. And I'm not, listen, this isn't one of those false humility things that preachers say to make you think they're humble even though they're not. I'm just putting my cards on the table, okay? I didn't even give First Service this example, so you're welcome, all right? We went to a conference this week with our teaching team. 4 of us went to a conference. It's a room full of 1,000 pastors from all over the country. I sit down in my seat, and one of the first thoughts that came into my mind was like, wow, I wonder if I am top 3 in this room with speaking. Like if they had a competition of the best preachers, I wonder if I could be better. I think I'm better than that guy, obviously. Listen, you're laughing. How terrible is that? I am in a room of pastors, and the first thing that came to my mind, it's a little too easy for God to forgive me. And before you say, Sammy, okay, well, you know that, I mean, come on now, you can't compare that to what David did. That's not the point. The point is not, well, the things I've done aren't compared to the things that David did. No. The point is that if you took all of my worst moments and all of my worst thoughts and you put them in a little video and you put them on the screen and we spend the rest of the service watching it, chances are everybody in the room would lean over to their neighbor and go, I think it's a little bit too easy that God forgave him. Also, I think we need a new pastor. My dude's got issues. The point is, no amount of good can pay for the bad that I have done and thought in my mind. The point is, I, like David, owe a debt I can't pay. And dare I suggest that most of you in this room owe a debt that you can't repay. That if we knew what you think and what you do and where you've been and how many times you've been there and how many times you've done the thing, we would all go, forgiveness should be a little bit harder than it is. And God, I believe, left this story in here in part because he wanted to send a message that was clear through all of humanity. And that message was, I don't care how deep the hole you get. I don't care how bad the decision was. I don't care how bad the circumstance was. If you let me, I will create a path for you to come back from your worst moments through the forgiveness of your sin. Don't get it twisted. I'm not saying that there aren't consequences to our actions, because there clearly are. And I'm not saying that God is indifferent, because he clearly is not. The text says that he was displeased. What I'm suggesting, though, is that in spite of the circumstances and in spite of the fact that our decisions sometimes displease God, God is committed to creating a way for you and I to come back from those moments. And a lot of that happens in the context of the forgiveness of our sins, because he is faithful to forgive those who deliberately disobey him. And I don't know if you guys have realized this or not, but the reason we are still naming our children David thousands of years later, even though this story is in the Bible, is not because David was faithful to his God. No, the reason we still name our kids David is because the God of David was faithful to David even when David was not faithful to him. The reason we still champion David is because God, in his mercy and compassion, was committed to being faithful in forgiving David. And I'm telling you right now, I know, because I've gotten the emails and the texts and we've had the conversations, I know that there are people in this room and you are convinced that God would never let that go. You are convinced that you will always carry that for all of your life. And God is going, I put this story in the Bible because I want you to know that if David could come back and be forgiven, you can come back and you can be forgiven. And not only can you come back and be forgiven, are you ready for this? You can be forgiven quicker than you've ever dared to believe. Watch again what happens in the verse. I am so excited. I was so excited in first service. I was sweating. I'm like, I'm going to need a new shirt. But then the sweat dried on my body. I'm like, don't need a new shirt. That's so gross. I don't know why I'm sharing that with you. But I just felt like we're having a vulnerable moment. But can we edit that off the? Okay, all right. Watch. Watch this. It says that David said to Nathan, I've sinned against the Lord. Nathan replied, the Lord has taken away your sin. Same verse. You see it? I've sinned against the Lord. The Lord has taken away your sin. Do you see how it's almost like David could barely get the confession out before the forgiveness was affirmed? Do you see how swift it was? I've sinned against the Lord, and the Lord has forgiven you. I have sinned against the Lord has forgiven you. I have sinned against the Lord. The same verse, the Lord has forgiven you. So not only did David receive forgiveness, but the forgiveness was swift and it was quick. And all the sinless, perfect people in the room can sit this part of the conversation out because obviously you don't have any issues. But the rest of us, I would love for you to consider the fantastical idea that God not only wants to forgive you for whatever you've done and however many times you've done it, but he wants to do it swiftly. And he wants to do it quickly. And I know it sounds like we're living in some kind of crazy fairy tale, but I dare you, if you believe in Jesus, to dream of a world where you are literally one honest confession away from complete forgiveness from the things that you've been carrying. Is it possible that you've been dragging this U-Haul behind you since middle school? And God is saying, you are one honest confession away. I have sinned against the Lord has forgiven you. Now, here's the part that's hard. I would not be a good Bible teacher if I didn't point out that when David confesses here, he's not doing that thing that you and I do when we confess today. You know that thing we do when, maybe God convicts us or we find some stuff that we got to work on and then we're like, all right, I'm going to just go have a conversation with God and tell him I'm sorry. Listen, there's a place for that. We should do that. But that's not this text. Watch. I'm so excited. Watch. I'm like a kid in the candy store. Watch. David said to who? To who? Come on now, say it with your chest. To who? Not to God. So it's not, Nathan says, you're the man. And I would have said, maybe not. Thank you. I'm going to go hang out with God now. We're going to talk about it. I'm like, God, I'm sorry. I sinned against you. No. It's not that confession. No. David said to Nathan. To Nathan. I have sinned against the Lord. What's happening here is David is showing us a way out. He's showing us how that for many of us, the comeback from our worst moments is not going to be fully affirmed until we embrace the kind of confession that is public. David said to who? Nathan. My guess, and I'm just guessing, I'm not a mind reader. My guess is that for many of us in here who love Jesus, that's not really an option. It's not on the table. I'm guessing that for many of us, we would rather just say to the Lord, right? Right? It's so, if you guys notice, have you noticed how much easier it is to tell God what you just didn't tell another human being? Anybody notice that? Isn't that interesting? I mean, think about it. Think about it. Just pause for a second and think. We do the craziest things. We would rather go to a holy God and go, yeah, messed up, than human beings. Like, we would rather be discovered, really, by God than by a fellow broken human being. Could it be, I'm just throwing this out there, please don't be mad at me and send me angry emails, but could it be that the reason it is easier for us to go to God than a human being is because going to God is kind of like pretend. It's not really real. Every Monday, I'm working out in my basement. My daughter, Lucy, is on the other side of the basement, and she got a whole bin of Barbies, and she's always playing pretend out loud for like an hour, and sometimes I'll forget. I'll be like, what'd you say? She's like, I'm just playing, Dad. I'm not talking to you. It's like this whole world. And I think for many of us, that's why it's easier. Come on, let's be honest. That's why it's easier to go to God, because it's like, it's not really real. So, yeah, we'll go to God and tell him, yeah, I messed up. I need you. But you ask us to go to a human being, flesh and blood, well, that's a different ballgame. That feels real, and that feels vulnerable, and we do not like that. And so what do? We hide. But we don't call it hiding. We call it quiet time. Oh, snap. All right? We call it, I'm just going to go to Starbucks and spend time with the Lord. And please go to Starbucks and spend time with the Lord. Take a picture and post it on the gram. That's all good. But newsflash, in case you missed the memo, there is no such thing as a private relationship with God anywhere in the Bible. There's no such thing. Personal? Yeah. Not private. Two different things. There's no such thing as God and I just gonna take care of the thing. No. Nathan confronted David, and David didn't go, okay, I'm going to go take care of it with God. No. David said to Nathan, I have sinned. And Nathan replied to David, the Lord has forgiven you. Is it possible, fam, that this is the missing piece? Is it possible that the piece that you and I are missing is not that we haven't been forgiven? No, is it possible that the reason that we don't know the forgiveness we've been given is because we have not stepped into the moment where God uses the people in our lives to affirm and confirm the forgiveness that he's already given us? Here's how James puts it in James chapter 5, verse 16. And I'm going to ask the keyboard player to come up so I can sound more spiritual when I talk. Listen to what James says. Sorry, I keep forgetting to give you cues, man. I'm my bad. Normally it's supposed to be subtle and nobody knows, and all of a sudden it's like, where's the music coming from? But now he's walking. Can we give him a hand, by the way? Let's just make it. I'm just kidding. I'm kidding, man. Thank you. It's already so awkward. I'm like, make it more awkward. Yay. Now we do a dance. Okay, listen, I'm almost done. James 5:16. Ooh, I'm having fun. Hopefully you are. Listen, James says this, one of Jesus' closest friends. He says, therefore, confess your sins to each other. Pray for each other so that what? You may be healed. I've said this many times. It's one of my least favorite verses in the whole Bible. Somebody asked me why. Thank you. I don't like this verse very much Because I want the promise without the practice. I want the healing without having to confess to other people. And James goes, that's not how it works. It's not how it works. You can't have the promise without the practice. If you want to be healed, you got to confess. And that is not to say that it is the act of confession that produces the forgiveness. I believe part of what the writer is saying is that it is in the practice of confession that the forgiveness we've already been given is confirmed and affirmed. Listen, Jesus already paid the price for everything you will ever do. It is done. You do not owe God anything if you put your faith in Jesus. But here's the deal. You will probably never know it unless you do what David did and you embrace not just private confession to God, but public confession to flesh and blood. Because when you do, all of a sudden it becomes real. All of a sudden you realize, I need a Savior. It's easy to pretend when it's just you and God. But when you bring other people in, you're like, I'm a mess. And God is going, that's the point. That's the point. Here's how it all came together in my head, and then I'll let us go. If I could sum it up in one phrase, it would be this. We have an opportunity today to choose. You can either look good or you can live free. Choice is yours. You can look good or you can live free. You can look good, keep pretending like, I got it. Or you can say, I don't got it. And you can live free. The choice is yours. Jesus already did the work. I want to give you guys a minute to answer two questions. Number one, what and who? What and who? What's that thing? What's that thing that's been gnawing in your heart this whole time I've been talking? That thing. If you know Jesus, you got the Holy Spirit. It's convicting you. That thing. You're trying to push it down. It's like, no, that thing. What is that thing that you need to confront? What is that thing that you need to go before God and go, mercy? And who are you going to bring in?